So, I'm reviewing today Frozen, which is book one in the Heart of Dread series, published in 2013 by Melissa de la Cruz and Michael Johnston. This book is what is popularly known as YA, or the young adult genre. Melissa de la Cruz I had not heard of before, but is apparently well known in the genre. And she had a couple of series that were previously successful, The Witches of East End and Blue Bloods. This book was published in 2013 and was the first book that she co-wrote with her husband, Michael Johnston. And you can see both of their pictures on the back cover here. It was followed in 2015 by book 2, Stolen, and then in 2017, book 3, Golden. And that's the complete trilogy. I've only read the first book in the series, and I only plan to read the first book in the series. So that's all I'm going to be talking about today. But it is a trilogy of 3 books. I should talk a little bit about why I read this and how this came across, how I happened to get my hands on this, because this is a book that's targeted at the young adult reading audience. Now, actually, I have a slight confession to make here. I don't exactly know what young adult means. I mean, I know it means it's not adults. Is it teenagers or preteens? I think it's actually preteens, right? The characters in this book are about 14, 15, and 16. The youngest character is 14. The other characters are around 16. But I think I think what's going on is that when kids read books, they like to read books about kids that are slightly older than themselves. They don't like to read about kids who are the same age as themselves, and they certainly don't like reading about kids who are a couple years younger than themselves, because that just seems like baby stuff. So if the book is about characters who are 14, 15, 16 years old, then the target audience has got to be a couple years younger than that. Right? Am I figuring this right? So it would be 11, 12, 13-year-olds would be reading this book. I think that's the target audience for YA. It may skew slightly older. I don't know. I am obviously not in that target demographic. I'm a 42-year-old man. I think this is aimed more at the female audience. It's a bit heavy on the romance. But I don't know. I'm living in Vietnam right now, and the selection of English books that are sold in bookstores here in Vietnam is limited. So whenever I go into a bookstore, it's never a question of finding the perfect book. It's just seeing what they have there on the shelves and then choosing something that looks interesting. A couple years ago when I bought this book, it was all over the bookshelves. This book and the other books in the series. It's since disappeared. I was in the same bookstore just today and couldn't find it again, but it seemed to be really popular for the moment. I looked at it and I knew it was YA, but I thought it could still be fun. And I was looking for escapist entertainment. I had been bogged down with some serious books I was trying to read, and I just wanted something light and easy and fun to read. And this looked, despite being, geared towards people significantly younger than myself, it looked like it might be fun. And I got hooked by the blurbs on the back, which I know I shouldn't have done. I should be smarter than that by now. But, it says, as fearless as a futuristic Game of Thrones. The mix of adventure and fantasy will have you addicted. Addicted is all in capital letters. And I thought, okay, that sounds like it could be fun. You know, kind of a Game of Thrones, but Game of Thrones light for younger readers with adventure and fantasy. Could be fun. Now there are definitely hints that this is geared towards teenage girls or preteen girls. For example, the review from 17.com, which is, I think, a magazine that targets teenage or preteen girls. And then MTV.com, ice cold hotness. And then if you open up the book, it's got quotes from the Romantic Times, and it talks about how it's, wildly romantic, is equal parts wild and wildly romantic. So it's, you know, I knew what I was getting into, but I thought, okay, even though I'm not the target audience for this, it could still be fun in a silly kind of way. So that's why I bought it, and that's what I was hoping for, and I regret to say that I found it pretty boring. And I'll get around to talking about why I thought it was boring in just a moment. But actually, I should say something here that I really should have said at the beginning of the video, which is, I'm a little bit worried that somebody is going to stumble across this video who's not one of my regular subscribers. In other words, somebody is going to be searching for reviews of this book. It's going to type it into the YouTube search engine, and this video may come up, I don't know. And I'm a little bit worried that somebody who actually is in the target audience for this book and maybe really enjoys it is going to stumble across my review where I'm giving it a rather tepid review. So, kids, if you're watching, let me just say this very clearly. My opinion about this book doesn't matter. I'm not in the target audience. The publishers and the authors were not trying to get me to like this book. When they made it, they were trying to get you to like this book. And if you like it, you're the ones who decide whether or not this book is successful with its target audience. That's not something I get to decide. So your opinion on this book is the only one that matters. Don't listen to me, and in fact, you can turn this video off right now and go find somebody your own age talking about this book. Because those are the opinions you want to listen to, and that's how you can judge whether or not this book is successful with its target demographic. Okay, now that I've gotten that out of the way, I found this book pretty boring. And of course I'm not in the target demographic, but I did actually, after I finished this book, went to Goodreads because I thought it might be interesting to compare my opinion of it with other people's opinion of it. And the Goodreads opinions are mixed. There's a lot of people who absolutely love this book, and there are a lot of people who appear to be in the target demographic who seem to share my opinion of this book. And at the moment, the 4 top-rated reviews of this book all absolutely hate it, and they all wrote long reviews slamming it, in which they had criticisms very similar to my own. Or I guess I should say my criticisms are similar to theirs, since they wrote their reviews first. And they appear to be, I don't know how old they are. They're not preteens, but they're people who are very much, it's obvious from reading their reviews, they're people who are very much involved in the YA community. So people who are familiar with the genre, familiar with what to expect from the genre. And you can go to Goodreads yourself and look at those reviews. After the first 4, then it starts to get positive again. And then there's a rush of positive reviews. But then if you keep going a couple pages more, then you get to positive and negative reviews alternating. But enough about Goodreads. I guess this video is to talk about my personal impressions of this. It's funny because I picked this up hoping it would be a light and easy read to just kind of distract me and give me some relief from the more serious books I've been working on. And I found it such a slog to get through. to a certain extent, I'm not quite sure why I finished it, but having started it, I don't know, I can be a little bit stubborn that way. I guess I just decided to stay with it, although it took me a couple tries. You know, I would get 30 pages in, I would get bored, I would shelve it, I would pick it up again, get another 50 pages in, get bored, and shelve it. I finally ended up finishing it because I took it with me on vacation. So this was the only book I had in my suitcase. So, you know, I had to read this or nothing. And, I mean, once I gave it my full attention, I was able to knock it out pretty easily in a couple of days. But, and semi-enjoyed it once I get into it. But it's not the best book in the world. But let me start at the beginning. It's a post-apocalyptic book, and it starts off with a character named Nat, who's special. She's got some sort of special. Well, yeah. Within the world of this book, there are people who are called marked, which are special in some ways, and she's one of the marked people. But even among the marked people, she seems to have something special going on with her, where she has this voice in her head that's guiding her. And when I was first reading this, it was a little bit confusing what was going on at first. There's this post-apocalyptic world. There are all these different beings running, races of people running around. There's the marked people, and then Nat has this weird voice in her head. And it was confusing, but to give credit where credit is due, by the end of the book, everything is making a lot more sense. So the authors have done a very good job, I think, of putting the mysteries in the beginning of the book, teasing them out throughout the middle of the book, and then having payoff at the end of the book. Oh, I should also mention that even though this is part one of a trilogy, the ending of this book is largely satisfying in and of itself. There are a few loose ends left to be picked up in the next couple books, but the journey that these characters are on does get a satisfying conclusion. So even though I have no intention of continuing on to the next couple books, I feel pretty satisfied with the ending I got from this book. Okay, so she's got this voice in her head. She's being kept at this sort of facility where they keep special people like her, people with special gifts. And of course, she's a teenager. Everyone in this book is a teenager. In fact, almost everybody in this book is a teenager. I'm not even exaggerating when I say that, because there's an in-universe explanation for that. It's a post-apocalyptic world in which pollution has just destroyed everything. And the whole world is toxic, and the water is toxic, and the oceans are toxic, and the ground is toxic, and climate change has completely screwed everything over. I mean, it's all frozen. But, you know, I think it's like that movie, The Day After Tomorrow. There's that theory of climate change, that it could actually disrupt disrupt something. And that's why we end up with actually an ice age coming in because of climate change. This book never spells that out exactly, but it appears to be following that same model, where climate change has disrupted things, leading to this big ice age that's covered the United States. So, right, as part of this toxic environment, everyone gets cancer and dies at a young age. So like 30 is considered like old. Very few people make it to 30 or past it. So it's this whole world run by teenagers. And as part of that, Nat falls in with some ex-soldiers who have left the army, dropped out of the army for various reasons. You get into their backstory more as you get through the book. They've dropped out of the army, and they've become mercenaries now for hire to kind of sell their specialized skills, while also trying to recover from the traumatic things they saw when they were in the army, and have a very jaded view of the world that they've picked up. and they're 16. And I think what they're going for is for some sort of Han Solo character, some sort of rogue rebel who's out on his own, and he doesn't care about the system anymore, and a Han Solo type character, but they've de-aged him down to 16 because I guess everybody in a YA book has to be 16. I thought, and I think a number of other reviewers have thought so as well, that this is seeming to be a little bit ridiculous. And it took me out of the story a bit. Excuse me. But admittedly, I think this is somewhat open for debate or somewhat open for interpretation. Meaning, in a world where you do have child soldiers and you do have people in the army at, I don't know, 12, 13, 14. I forget exactly the ages they were in the army at, but one of their crew is 14, and I think he's already ex-military like they are. So they must be getting inducted into the army at 12 or something like that. I mean, in that world, maybe you would have kind of 16-year-olds acting like 35-year-olds. Maybe if they had gone through those experiences, they would just mature that much faster. Or possibly they just get really screwed up because maybe they're too young to emotionally process what happened to them, and I don't know. You could debate it, maybe, what people would be like in this scenario with child soldiers and stuff like that. But that's the world of this book. So she wants to escape from the town. She gets taken on by a group of runners. One of them is the leader, who's 16 and who's ex-military and who's picked up some skills that he's now trading on the black market. He's the leader of the group. And he has done a lot of terrible things in his life, but he's one of these people who's like a scoundrel with a heart of gold. Actually, as you read through the book, you realize that actually he didn't really do that many terrible things. He was just there when they went down. At the beginning, it's implied that he had some baggage, and this gets cleared up later in the book. So they're on this journey together, and it's a romance book, and it's a romance book, I think, written for teens or preteens, so it's a very slow burn, meaning there's a lot of talk about, oh, he looked pretty hot, I think he was smiling at me, I gently touched his arm, and it all climaxes near the end of the book when they kiss for the first time. So it's a desexualized romance, which I guess, given the target audience for this book, makes sense. It's a bit odd, and maybe this is me just bringing in the wrong expectations to the genre. I'm sure that's it, actually. But I found the place of sex rather odd in this world. It's obvious that sex exists in this world because the boys, the ex-military guys, are constantly giving each other jokes about various sexual exploits. Constantly. I say that it's actually mostly off the page. The author will say something like, he rarely took part in the other boys joking, or the boys were always giving him a rough time because he hadn't been with a girl, or something like that. Well, when you actually read the book, it's not like every page is joking about sex, but there are various comments that the authors make, which indicates that this is part of the world, and this is part of the joking that goes on with the boys, and they do have sexual history is heavily implied. And yet the whole romance between Nat and Wes seems very desexualized. There's a lot of flirting going on, and she touches his arm and stuff like that, but it's all very middle school type stuff. Even going on to the point where at one point they're sleeping in the same bed with each other, and there seems to be a little bit of cuddling going on, like he's got his arms around her and he's whispering in her ear. And at one point I actually thought it's probably being implied that they're having sex. I mean, it's not in the page, but it's probably being implied. But then later in the book, it was such a big deal and they kissed for the first time. And then after I read that, then I thought, oh, okay, well, then obviously there was no physical intimacy earlier before. When they were just sleeping on the same bed and when he had his arms around her or they were snuggling, that's really just all it was. And not having read a lot of YA books, especially this particular type of YA book, I'm not really sure how common this is in the genre. It's probably just par for the course in these genres, huh? But I found it a bit odd that there was so much snuggling and touching, but it seemed the sexual tension seemed to be completely absent. But I shouldn't find that odd, should I? Because if we're assuming that the target audience for this is 11 and 12-year-olds, then of course it would be a very innocent view of romance. The main complaint I have about this book is that the characters were very flat. There was Wes, who was kind of the scoundrel with the heart of gold, and there was Nat, who was the special chosen one, both of which are very standard tropes with these types of books. But at least they're recognizable as characters, even though they're tropes. Everyone else in the book, though, is very flat. There's Shakes, who's Wes's friend and right-hand man. And then there's two boys, Zedric and Darren, who are also along. And they're brothers, and they're essentially almost indistinguishable from each other as far as the narrative goes. And they play kind of surly, annoying teenage boys. They come off... I mean, to be fair, they're meant to be annoying. The reader is not supposed to like them. And I didn't like them. But you've got these characters they're on this long journey kind of together. First through the snowlands and then through the sea where they're all in this boat together. Where you have three characters. The right-hand man guy is pretty boring. The surly teenage characters are just kind of annoying. And then you just have the two main characters. And it just gets boring for a lot of the book. To be fair, there are parts where it is good. There's an escape from the city where they're in the car and they're driving and people are shooting at them and there's a car chasing them and they're trying to shoot back while driving the car at the same time and make the escape. It's a cinematic scene, you know. It's something you can imagine being filmed on the big screen in a movie or something like that. It translates to the page fairly well. There are a few points where I had to kind of read it carefully because I think whenever you translate something like that to the written page, it works better on the cinema screen because you have a much better visual idea of where everything is in relationship to each other during a car chase like that. On the written page, I think the authors did a good job of it, and it worked pretty well. I was able to follow it more or less, kind of rereading it a little bit. And they were building up some sort of tension where they're like, the sniper, get him! And they're trying to shoot where they're driving. And so I'm not describing this well, but it comes off reasonably well on the page. That same scene, however, has Nat, the main character, say, "Oh, some rescue this is. Is this all the plan you guys have to get me out of here?" And of course, you hear that and you immediately, if you're of my generation at least, you immediately think of Star Wars, where almost the exact same line is in Star Wars. Princess Leia says, "What kind of rescue is this?" And that was maybe fairly typical of this book, where even when it was at its best, it was reminding you of other books or other movies that had done the same thing better, and that this book was obviously relying heavily off of. There's a very similar thing when they finally get to the ship that Wes has. And Nat says, "That's your ship? What a piece of junk that is." Which of course is also again very similar to Star Wars. And similar things like that throughout the book. But yeah, what was I going to say next? Oh, the world of this, the world that's in this novel, gets sketched out at the beginning in very broad terms, because the main character, Nat herself, doesn't know a lot about what's out there in the world once she gets out of her city. But there are rumors of all these magical creatures. There's these creatures called the small men, and then there are these sylphs with magical powers, and there's marked people, and then there's what they call thrillers, which at first sight appear to be zombies. But then later we learn maybe there are magical creatures who are degenerating. It all sounds quite interesting in the opening chapters when it's all being laid out. And initially it did catch my attention. I thought, okay, maybe this book will be pretty good. And then you're just kind of wading through the book, and it's just boring and boring and boring. And then kind of in the last third of it, we do get to the magical creatures a bit, or the other creatures. And we do meet some of the small men. And we do meet some of the sylphs, I believe they're called. But they're very boring when we meet them. The small men are small, they're like the size of toddlers is how the book describes them, or I guess maybe like the size of dwarfs, or I don't know. But there's some hints that they can do some magic, and there's some hints about that they have their own unique culture, but there's really not much there. And in other words, like if fantasy at its best is about world building and creating this immersive world that you just want to get lost in. And this book is really terrible at that. And that's probably my main criticism of this book, is that the world building is just really flat. It seems like it's going to be interesting at the beginning when it's talking about all these strange, mysterious things that are out there. But then once we meet these things, they turn out to be just as boring as all the other characters in the book. And as far as world building goes, I'm not entirely sure the book all makes sense. And again, this is something that other reviewers have picked up on as well. But it's as a post-apocalyptic world where everything is scarce. Like it costs like so much money to get a clean glass of water. They talk about oxygen addicts because people have to pay money to get this clean air, and then you can get addicted to the clean air, and then it's not really described very well in the book, but apparently it's something that's happening in this world. And given this immense scarcity, you would expect a very primitive type of civilization, but the civilization, at least that we have in the cities, there's a big standing army which is getting fed somehow. There's a casino where people are gambling, and it is explained in the book that there's a huge difference between the way the super rich live and the way everybody else lives. But I found it a little bit hard to swallow that you could have a society that was functioning at that level, even given that the super rich have more privileges, and even given that the government is prioritizing its food for the army. It just seemed a little bit strange to me that the description of scarcity combined with what we were seeing in the book in the big cities and the descriptions of luxury. But again, maybe this is your own judgment call as to how much leeway you want to give the book and how much you think that makes sense. So, yeah, I don't know what else to say about this book. It wasn't the worst thing ever. There were scenes that were all right.